We are back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. I read my next guest regularly, even though I haven't talked to him for a while. You should read him regularly as well. John Nichols is the Washington correspondent for The Nation. He is the author of books too numerous to mention at this point, and he is written several articles recently that I was looking forward to talking with him about. So, without any further ado, John Nichols, welcome back to the Zero Hour.
It's an honor to be with you, my friend, as always.
And an honor to have you. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, you've written several pieces lately that particularly caught my eye, but I want to start with this one, which is, I'm going to guess, a week or two old now. It's up at the Nation. The headline is, I'm going to turn my glasses on. You gave me flack about them just like you did about the jacket, but what Bernie Sanders taught Democrats about labor solidarity is the headline. And talk to us about that a little bit, because first of all, tell us what what you wrote about in terms of Bernie, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. I appreciate it, and I'm glad you focused on that one because I think it's an important message. Um, Bernie Sanders went down to Bessemer, Alabama, uh, roughly, depending on when people watch this, around a week and a half ago. And it was at the last stages in preparation for the vote at the Amazon warehouse there, where around 6,000 people were deciding whether to unionize. As we speak, we don't have the results of that vote. We will at some point. But Sanders went down with Danny Glover and Killer Mike to deliver kind of a final push for the union. That was not an uncommon thing, right? You and I both know that if there's a union struggle and there's a need, there's a very good chance Bernie Sanders is going to show up. But what was different this time was he wasn't the only one who showed up. A lot of other Democrats showed solidarity with the retail wholesale department store union organizing drive at Amazon in Alabama, in part because it's a very important drive, no question of that, but also because I think there has been a real change within the Democratic Party, a Democratic Party that I've covered for a very long time and you've covered for just as long, that often failed to step up when there was a union struggle. And I can list 100 of them where, the Democrats they didn't show up, or if they did, it was with a little bit of a polite note, rather than anything real. This time you did have letters of solidarity. You had members of Congress flying down to Alabama. You had the president of the United States cutting a video that was, it wasn't like a rip-roaring call to action, but it was pretty good. And what I argue in the piece is that this is one of the real impacts of Bernie Sanders' candidacies for the presidency in 2016 and 2020. He integrated labor solidarity into those campaigns. He went to picket lines. He supported labor struggles. He supported organizing struggles. And far from it hurting him politically, I think it helped him. I think it made a lot of sense, and it also was smart politics. And I think other Democrats have noticed this. And so this is one of the, to my mind, many contributions that Bernie Sanders has made to contemporary politics.
I was so glad you wrote this piece, John, because I think it's an important story. And you and I were friends before I went to work for Bernie, but you have covered Bernie for many years, and go back a ways with him, as a long ways with him, I think. And you know that for a long time he seemed, let me put it this way, that he was, in my view anyway, in my view, he was treated like an anachronism by broad swaths of the Democratic Party leadership, and that part of what they viewed as anachronistic about Bernie was his stalwart support for labor. I mean, you had this sort of sense that there's, the old guys, the old Democrats like labor, but those days are long gone, and now we're the new Democrats, and we think about corporate partnerships and that kind of thing. And what struck me about your article, I didn't realize until I read your article that this letter from Democratic senators went out from Sherrod Brown, Cory Booker, Ron Wyden, Bob Menendez, Merkley, on quite a number of Democratic senators, and several of those people are good, solid progressives anyway. But it seems to me that just as he did with Medicare for All as an example in 2015, 2016, he's kind of, I don't want to be facile and say, making labor cool again, but he there is a sea shift, and to me this is promising not just for labor but for the Democratic Party because unions remain popular according to the polls. So is there a new? Is it? Do you think? Nobody can predict the future, of course, but do you think this augurs a new or a renaissance of Democratic Party labor solidarity?
I do, at least to some extent, and I think that we have to put it in perspective and understand what happened. The Democratic Party was at its strongest when it was most closely tied to labor, and we have all of these think pieces now and kind of like ruminations on national TV. How do the Democrats reconnect with the working class and stuff like that? Well, I've got a tip for you. Why don't you back their right to organize and collectively bargain? That's a really good way to connect with working class people across all races, across all regions, across all, perspectives. And the Democratic Party got weak on that. It wasn't that the Democrats abandoned support for labor, or frankly that labor abandoned support for the Democrats. Usually the endorsement was exchanged, and there was the tip of the hat and stuff, but it wasn't passionate. It wasn't, something that was kind of at the heart of the party. I don't think it's there even now for all Democrats. I think there are plenty of Democrats who still, kind of wonder, well, why are we pro labor? Or, you know what I mean? They don't quite get the fundamental reality. But here is the fundamental reality. First and foremost, if we accept that the Republican Party is the corporatist party in this country, despite Donald Trump's attempts to, present himself as a populist, there's got to be another side, right? There are two sides to this coin, and support for labor is something that should be expected of the Democratic Party. It should be the baseline. And I think that what has happened is we have seen a renaissance in labor organizing and a renaissance in understanding of the need for labor, right? That doesn't come from politicians. That comes from working people, especially younger people, recognizing the need. But now we're at this sort of critical juncture where things are happening around the country. And the question is, it's the old, song title, which side are you on? And Democrats are, at least some are recognizing they need to step up. They need to be there more clearly. The party in general has to do more. And of course, the critical test doesn't just come with endorsing an organizing drive. The critical test is going to come in doing what happened in the 1930s, and that is passing legislation that makes it easier to organize, that kind of knocks down the barriers. And that's obviously the PRO Act, which is in play in Congress. It's going to be hard to pass, but it has to pass. It's a very vital struggle. And I think some of what we're seeing is moving us in that direction. And the final thing I'll say on this is that you and I know why you should support labor, because it's right to be in solidarity with labor, that working people need to have a voice, right? But there's also a political argument for it. The Republicans have gone after labor unions, tried to deconstruct them, tried to weaken them for a very, very long time, because they know that when there is a strong labor movement, when it does education about politics, when it engages in politics, not giving money to candidates, which, I think is the last thing you should worry about, but actually, working with their members to help members to understand the importance of elections and to engage at a grassroots level. When you've got a strong labor movement that does that, and if it's, generally backing Democrats, maybe not always, but generally, that's very, very good for the Democratic Party electorally. So here you have this kind of 1-2 punch.
Right.
It's the right thing to do. It's also very smart politically.
It's almost though. First of all, John Nichols, I agree with everything you said, but for the Democratic Party as an institution, it almost feels like kicking an addiction.
Yes.
You're right. I think you know where I'm going, right? Because you referenced Bill Clinton and the New Democrats, and the decision was made, the calculation was made. in the 1990s, unions were weakening in force in terms of unionization of the private sector, and corporations had a lot of money to spend. We can distance ourselves from pro union policies. We can ingratiate ourselves with corporations. Donations start flowing in, campaign contributions. So, in a sense, I think that's become a kind of dependency on the part of the Democrats. So to me, from a party point of view, there's the kind of the withdrawal they've got to go through. So I think it's really hurt them politically. My personal feeling is calculus. They got some money, but they intensified their alienation from the working class, or vice versa, and distancing from the working class. They lost a lot of that support, and now somehow they're taking the first step. The first step is admitting you have a problem, right? They're admitting or some of them are admitting they need to reach out to labor again. But where does this go from here? At what point do they have to, face a crossroads and say, well, no, we're sticking with labor?
They have to take some dangerous stands, right? And politics only matters when it's dangerous, right? It doesn't matter, if it's easy to do, right? If it's easy to fly out to the Silicon Valley and collect a bunch of checks, right? You can bet Democrats will do it. It matters when you say, no, we think that the drivers of the buses that go to Google should be organized into a union, and that we're going to support that organizing drive. You know what I mean? It's like you start to cross the people who have given you checks, right? You start to push back against it. And I'm not here to tell you the Democratic Party is all the way there. I don't think it is. But I can tell you where the couple places where the battles are going to come. And they are going to come in this post-COVID moment when we apparently, it looks like, we'll see if it's the case, have a rise in employment, right? There's a lot of hiring going on.
Right.
And the question of, as that happens, as there's a little bit of scarcity, that's a good place at which to organize. It's a good place to make demands for unions. And so I suspect we're going to come into a period of a lot of union volatility in a good way. And that's a big test for the Biden administration and for Democrats in Congress and the state legislatures to back that up, to be clearly on that side. So that's number one. Two other things very quickly. Number two, trade policy is going to continue to be a vital fight. Democrats got trade policy wrong for a very, very, very long time. And that broke their relationship, especially with industrial workers, but frankly, with a lot of workers across the country. There are going to be a lot of trade fights. They have to be done right. And in this case, we talked about Bernie. We should also listen to Sherrod Brown on some of this. And, there are very wise voices there, and the Democrats need to recognize why Sherrod Brown wins in Ohio, but every other Democrat loses, right, at the statewide level. That's because he's been right on these trade policy issues. So that's number two. Last thing that I just put in the mix very quickly is we are in a period of automation and robotification. This is a transformative time in our economy. The great question in this moment is whether major decisions about how we deal with driverless cars and all sorts of other realities, automation of our workplaces, whether those decisions are going to be made in the interest of corporate bottom lines, or will they be made in the interest of workers, communities, society? And frankly, I think that's going to get sorted out in this 4-year period, in this Biden era. It's going to be a big deal, along with climate change and a host of other issues. And Democrats have to be on the right side of that, and that is to be on the side of the working class. Frankly, I see there an intersection between the automation, robotification issues and the Green New Deal. And if they do it right, I think that you do have the potential for an FDR kind of moment. If they do it wrong, you have the potential for a Bill Clinton kind of moment.
And if I recall correctly, John Nichols, you wrote a book on the subject of automation and robotification entitled People Get Ready, a tribute to the great Curtis Mayfield, of course. And to me, maybe the stakes are even higher than that, John, in the sense that, as you well know, as unions have declined, employers are keeping more and more of the productivity gains. It's flatlining on the worker side. If we see a situation where obviously is my statement, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. If we see a a situation where productivity soars again as a result of technology without a strengthening of unions and labor and working people overall, to me, we could see inequality that makes today's drastically horrible
Totally.
situation vastly worse.
Yes. In fact, you're exactly right. You're going to the exact right place. And this is probably the most important thing you and I will say to each other. In this period of automation and robotification, in this transformational period in our economy, which is going to be accelerated by what we just went through with COVID-19, because of course, robots don't get sick, right? And so as a result, you're going to see a lot of industries looking for automated models for robotification in industrial settings, things of that nature. Companies are going to look at that as a way to make more money, right? Right. Um, but that doesn't mean that human workers are going to be eliminated. That's the great mistake when we talk about a period of automation. There are still going to be a lot of jobs that human beings have to do. The question is whether we will realize the transformation and the gains made, right, on productivity
Right.
by making the lives of working class people better, right? And saying, well, okay, we got all these machines, but what are we doing for human beings? The bottom line on this is human beings should be able to work less for more pay. That's not some utopian fantasy. That is a baseline fair calculus coming into this situation, because human beings are going to have to be trained to do more complicated jobs, to keep the robots working, to do all the other things related to it. There won't be as much need for drudgery, right? And so in this setting, we ought to have a lot of training, and then we ought to have a lot of good pay, and we ought to frankly have a lot of leisure. We can make a better society out of this. And believe me, if you do that, things are going to come out well. On the other hand, if you don't do that, if you simply let the market manage the next 10 years, here are two things you're going to have. Number one, the planet is going to burn because they will not use our technological progress to address climate crisis.
Right.
And number two, people are going to burn themselves out because they will be working harder, longer hours for just to keep up and to keep ahead of all the stuff that's going on. And we can telescope it right into Amazon. In the reason that we have had such a debate as regards Amazon about the bathroom breaks is because in Amazon, the people are treated as machines. They literally have to, work so hard and, meet every 15 seconds, do all these things. And it is inhuman. It is overwhelming.
And as you know, John, this is not a phenomenon that's restricted to Amazon, although they are one of our worst examples. But I mean, employers who track their employee activities and movements on their cell phones and limit their ability to take bathroom breaks and what were then office jobs and will presumably be again post COVID. So, this is in fact, and this is why I think Bernie was right to single out, as others have done, the Amazon fight in Alabama as being a kind of linchpin case for all of this. And I just want to end this part of the conversation on an optimistic note by saying I always go back to it years and years now, the Jetsons, because who doesn't, right? I mean,
yeah, really.
Because George Jetson, a mid-60s, 1960s cartoon, George Jetson, ordinary, everyman kind of working person, worked 2 hours a week at Spacely Sprockets, and for that 2 hours a week, made enough to have a home in the sky, a spaceship car, raise a family of four, and have a robot maid. So that was based on the state of the country at the time, right? Which was that productivity gains were being shared between labor and capital. And that stopped. But I endorse the prospect of a Jetsons future.
Man, I'm with you, comrade. And let me just tell you that as we close off this portion, because this is exciting stuff to talk about, because if we get it right, so much can be better for so many people, and we can have that Jetsons future, just for Judy and Elroy and everybody. But this is the interesting thing. The Jetsons did not occur in a vacuum. In the early 1960s, there was a fascination with automation. Presidents, civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., others, spoke about automation all the time. There were national commissions studying automation and saying, how are we going to realize all of these gains? They did all sorts of studies, and many of them were oriented toward work of the future and how we make it work for the great mass of people. It was at a time when we had strong unions and we actually understood, the concept of the worker in the workplace and how they might be treated. All of those studies were put aside, right? They're used to like hold up, one ledge in a place or keep a table even. Why? Two things. Number one, Vietnam came. In the Vietnam War, we steered our technological thinking into military industrial complex, and we never really turned back. That was number one. Number two, they were ahead of the curve. They thought automation was going to come more quickly. And so they had all sorts of studies for implementing, and then you didn't quite get there as quickly as you thought. So you thought, I guess we were anticipating something that's never going to happen. Well, the reality is we are now at the point where it is happening. We reached that kind of Moore's Law pivot. And if people understand Moore's Law, it's just that you reach a point in technological advancement where what you think about doing, you can actually do. We're there. And this is the critical point at which to kind of dust off some of the old studies, do new studies. And I will give a compliment right here to Joe Biden. In the infrastructure bill, there's a huge amount of money for R&D studies about the future of work and for looking at some of these issues. And I think that's a good thing. But it's how many news shows have you heard talking about it? Right? None.
No, you're right that it's a very important subject, and it's good way to pivot to Joe Biden now, because and it's interesting. Just parenthetically, by the way, John, my political social sphere is divided between people who are thrilled about Biden, people who are lukewarm about what Biden's are doing, and people are saying, well, it's not the revolution, which is true. It's not the revolution. I think we need a revolution. But I wanted to specifically address another piece you wrote. Biden's quote unquote transformative plan redefines infrastructure to include caregiving. Biden wants to put $400 billion towards expanding quality home or community care. You quote Ai-jen Poo, who's been on this program as well, telling the nation that's historic progress. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is huge, and of course, as is usual, it's a very undercovered part of the plan. So Joe Biden has given us a $2.2 trillion plan. That first and foremost is good, right? Because it's pretty big. Is it big enough? No, it is not. It should be bigger. And I'm not the one saying that. Engineers say that
right.
What exactly. We have to do is a lot more. Right. But 2.2 trillion at this point is a huge amount of money, and Joe Biden had the guts to do it. He didn't do the lie, right? The usual lie of if you're going to go at 2, you do 1.9, right? So it's not really a 2. So at least he went over the line, and I give him
a 99-cent special. You're right.
Exactly. So I give him a little bit of credit just for that, just in the actual number. And of course, this plan has a lot of money for roads and bridges. Yeah, it's an infrastructure bill. That's what we understand: roads and bridges. And it's there, and it's it's pretty well targeted for a lot of shovel-ready projects, et cetera. It's also got something that they're kind of like putting the nose under the tent here in the definition of infrastructure. They're saying that we're going to get ready for electric vehicles, right? And there's a ton of money there, a huge amount of money for electric vehicles, and particularly for setting up the system so that you can drive across the country and keep yourself powered up, and that's good, and that's it. That's getting us into some of the climate issues. And again, I think that's, it's a little bit stretched, but it's still under the traditional infrastructure model, right? But this is where it gets exciting. Biden takes the next steps here, and I'm not just saying Biden. Obviously, it's his advisors, and frankly, it's the activist community that pushed for these things. There is a huge amount of money for broadband and digital build out, which is really, really good stuff. And that has an educational component as well as economic component, particularly because we know the stories of kids who are sitting in parking lots outside libraries in rural areas, trying to get an internet connection so that they can finish their homework. It's a bad disconnect in this country as regards digital build out, and there's a lot of money to do that. That's a real equity issue. So that's a little bit of an expansion. Now we're Now we are roads and bridges, electric cars, digital infrastructure. And then here's where we go the big step, and that is caregiving. And there's $400 billion. Now, Richard, I know you deal in this kind of money, but a lot of us, you might like say, oh, 400 million, 400 billion. 400 billion is a lot of money that's in there for caregiving. And it's in a broad definition, but basically it's expanding Medicare, Medicaid, expanding existing programs, opening them up in ways that really do produce guarantees, hopefully, for families that have an elderly loved one, perhaps a disabled member of the family. Ultimately, we would hope to move toward children as well, but to create a situation where if you have a family member who is in care, in need of care, be that in a community institution or at home, you're not going to go bankrupt, right? You can actually employ someone to do that. And the critical element of this, Ajahn Poo and others teaching us this, is to make that work, you have to pay these people a fair wage, and you have to give them fair benefits, good hours, respect and support. And it's in there. There really is a plan to provide caregivers with living wages, with a level of, again, support on the job, and the right to unionize. This is huge stuff. And remember that caregivers are overwhelmingly women and disproportionately women of color. And so this is at once a great initiative for the economy, because if we can care for our loved ones, we can then work, that it makes all the other pieces come together. It's a great initiative for society in general, because it creates a lot of security where there isn't now, and that's to the good. And it is an equity issue. This is a point at which I think the lessons that activists have taught us over the last 10, 20 years about the need to be intersectional in how we think about addressing issues comes to a head. And it's in there, and it is historic, and it's something that progressives should be fighting for this with everything they've got, right? This should be a great big battle, understood as such, because if progressives succeed, 10 years from now, when you talk about the social safety net, you will say, not as we traditionally do now, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. You will say Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and care. And if we expand it in that way, that's fundamental.
I always think of progressivism as real progressivism as being a frontier of ideas, among other things, and that a broadening of awareness, a broadening of thought, conceptual expansion. So I appreciate that you said that, and I also think that, of course, Biden's gotten a lot of pushback from conservatives on this, saying that's not infrastructure. But to me, one of the interesting things about this proposal, in addition to the things that you've just listed, is that I think it's interesting and important that we start to think about things like care as a form of infrastructure. That when we talk about bridges, roads, subways as infrastructure, they're there so that working people can get to work, can earn a living, can participate in society. When I lived in New York City, I didn't have a car and a driver. I took the subway, for a token as it was then. You get to work, and to me, care is an element of the infrastructure of the working class in America. That a lot of us, including I was a caregiver for my mother, but a lot of us can't work the way we should be able to work because this infrastructure is not available to us. So to me, the conceptual breakthrough has not even been, celebrated in nearly
Right.
the way it should. And I assume you agree with me, but I don't want to assume.
Oh no, I totally agree, and that's why I wrote the article. And I think this redefinition of caregiving or redefinition of infrastructure to include caregiving is vital. And this is the other component of it. There's simple economics here, and I wish Joe Biden would. I wish he was talking to America more. I wish he would go on and do like addresses to the nation about things and explain at this most basic level. And I wish other Democrats would as well, because here's the core thing to understand. Why are caregivers paid so little? Well, the answer is not because they don't do vital work. They do. They save lives. They make lives functional. I mean, they are the whole infrastructure of our society is underpinned by caregivers, right? The work is vital. So why are they paid so little? Well, the answer is that families who get into a difficult situation look at the amount of money they have and the amount of money that they can get through government programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and stuff like that. And they say, I can't afford, that, $3,000 a month or that $6,000 a month. I can't pay that, right? And so there's an incredible downward pressure on pay for caregivers. If we create a guarantee, right? If we say that yes, if you have a loved one who needs care, you're going to be able to get the support to do that via Medicare, Medicaid, other programs, then suddenly, that downward pressure is relieved. Maybe it won't disappear at all, but it is relieved. And then if we say at the same time that there are going to be incentives and encouragement for these people to unionize if they choose to do so, then we start to create an upward pressure there. So suddenly all the economics starts to work here. And this is a place where government can come in. The market will not do this. The market will not solve this problem. The government can come in the same way we did in the 1930s with elderly poverty, right? We were concerned about poverty among the elderly, among those who couldn't work. And so we did Social Security in the same way when we did in the 1960s. Remember, in 1960, the poverty rate in the United States was around 20%. In 1970, and we'd had some economic changes, job changes, it was down around 12, 13%. What was the big change in there? Medicare.
Right.
I mean, when you addressed healthcare for the elderly, and then when you did Medicaid as well to address for others, I mean, that made a huge, huge impact. You moved poverty numbers massively. Now, did the country collapse when we did that? Country did not collapse when we did Social Security. We didn't go broke. Country did not collapse when we did Medicare and Medicaid. We didn't go broke. And the country will not collapse when we do care. It won't go broke. If we put this in and make this a part of our overall structure, we will advance significantly as a society, and we will be more prosperous, not just caregivers, but all of us, because we'll have a much more functional economic and social setting.
And last point about this, if you have the time, John Nichols,
Of course.
which is uh, the overall economic impact of this. I mean, I see this among other. See this as a moral good. So, which is to me stands above economics. But in terms of economics, since you brought that up, to me, make it if you make money more available to working families by supporting this type of care, if you allow working families to go out and take jobs where maybe they weren't able to before, or full time instead of part time because they're able to now, if you increase jobs and wages for people who provide care, and you create pathways to do that, the overall benefit to economic growth to me, has got to be substantial. I don't know if there are any studies on it yet, but to me, if you invest $400 billion of public money in expanding this care sector, the benefits and increased spending and so on from the families themselves, from the workers and so on, has got to be, I would think, significant.
You're right. There will be a benefit, and there will also be a economic slash social benefit to society that is somewhat of an intangible, but it will ultimately be studied, and if we do this, it will be something you can measure, and that is, think of all the people who, with a little bit of care, right, with a little bit of assistance, and these are our isolated elderly and our isolated people with disabilities. They may not have a lot of family support. They may not, they may really struggle in these times. If you can provide them with a guarantee of care, right? And that's the help to do the basic things they need to do. Those people are going to be able to work. Not all the elderly necessarily, but a lot of people with disabilities are going to be able to do more work, and they're going to be able to realize their potential as regards their intellectual possibilities. Where they may come up with the ideas that solve the problems of the world. Just as, we're looking at the COVID vaccine, and we're noting the number of immigrants and refugees who played critical roles in the research that got us through the COVID crisis. Giving care to people who have so much potential, frees them to contribute in ways we can't even begin to imagine societally and economically. And so this is a really, really good idea. I can't begin. I could preach this gospel, to the end of time. And I think that it troubles me a little bit that some of the Democrats are not recognizing how important it is to deliver this message. And I fear that in the negotiations over the infrastructure bill, I fear the bargaining away of elements, and that this might be the element that gets bargained away. We are so close right now to a New Deal, fair deal, great society breakthrough, and we ought to be fighting like crazy to make sure that we can get it.
And we could have made just as compelling an argument, in my view, for it just by talking about disabled people alone.
Absolutely. Yes.
And the horror stories we've covered on this show alone of people who could die because insurers or other intermediaries don't think they need help when they would die if there was a power failure or they moved the wrong way. So, all right, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but you've convinced me, John Nichols. I'm certainly going to speak out in favor of this. And this was my first attempt having you on to talk about it. So, as always, John Nichols, Washington correspondent for The Nation and prolific author. As always, thanks for these insightful articles. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Richard, it is always an honor to be with you and always the best discussion. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and you're listening to The Zero Hour.